Well, all eyes will be on that, Ritu. Thank you very much for bringing us those details. Let's delve a little bit more into the story. And to do that, and to help us understand the implications and some of the sectors that the government may focus on this time around, we have with us Vivek Gupta, partner at BMR Advisors. Vivek, always a pleasure to speak with you, and welcome to India Business Hour. You know, so far the thrust of this government really has been on easing FDI rules, opening up more sectors. We saw in December 2015, the government had eased the FDI rules for 15 sectors, followed it up in the month of June 2016 by opening up and increasing the FDI cap in sectors like defense and aviation. And now in the budget, they've decided to do away with the FIPB altogether. But this time around, at least the information that we have is post-Holi is when there'll be another set of announcements as far as addressing the impediments, when it comes to making big-ticket investments in the country. If you were to advise the government, Vivek, what would you want the government to focus on? Which are the impediments that the government should address when it comes to easing FDI rules? Vivek.
See, I think at a principle level, if we see history, in the last 5 years, as you already mentioned, you recounted a few of those incidents, but in the last 5 years, we've seen 12 or 13 announcements from the government on tinkering with FDI rules. What I would lay out as a principle for the government, therefore, would be something to the effect that bring the same degree of rigor as you've had on some of your other economic activities, like, for example, what you've done with the coal sector, and institute a comprehensive reform of FDI in a manner that the norms that come out actually result in meaningful FDI coming into the country. I can give you an example. The retail norms now have been with us since 2012. Or at least on the multi-brand retail side, we haven't seen much activity at all happening. And the reason is very clear, because the norms that the government has put out are not something that gives us an economically feasible model straight off the bat. Now, the government may very well have its reasons for those norms, but what I would want the government really to focus on is to think through clearly where the policy can come up with economically feasible models, and only in those cases should definite announcements on liberalization be made. So, for example, if you were to do something on the retail side, then it stands to reason that if someone comes in a supermarket format, then he should be allowed to do a reasonable supermarket, which means not only food items but also some non-food items. That could be a potential area that the government could look at. But principally what I would like to see this time, and this government has shown that it can do it, is that instead of making a bunch of incremental announcements, the government institutes a properly calibrated, thought through policy, which it then does not have to tinker around with for at least 2 years.
Vivek, you mentioned some points as far as the multi-brand retail area is concerned. So if you had the government next to you right now, the three sectors that we understand, multi-brand retail, commodity and media, what will be the 2-3 points that they need to implement immediately to actually work out that reform that we are talking about?
See, government policy has to balance not only what we may want as investors. Government policy has to balance a lot of societal considerations, political compulsions, and a bunch of other stuff. So I really don't hold any policy prescription for the government in terms of saying that they should open up X sector or open up Y sector. All I say is, if they take the decision to open up a sector, then don't put constraints which absolutely destroy the economic model for that sector. Come up with a realistic framework where we will actually see dollars flow into the economy. Now, one can this is a matter of detail, but one can sit on each of those sectors that you mentioned. So, for example, for retail, multi-brand retail, one can determine what would be a good economic model which would encourage companies to come in and invest in India and offer them a fair, level playing field whereby they can make reasonable profits and contribute to the Indian economy as well.
So essentially, Vivek, what you're saying is that government so far has made half-hearted attempts and it should go to full throttle. Let's talk about full throttle then. FIPB, the big announcement that came in from the budget, which was clearly one of the big takeaways from the budget as well. Now, when I speak with some of the, some of the sectors that may stand to benefit from this. Even though we may look at the FIPB and say, this is perhaps the last relic of the industrial license era. But the point is, despite all its, flaws, alleged flaws, the fact is it was still a single window clearance. Now, when you have investments coming in from China, let's say in sensitive sectors like telecom, or it could be, in defense, which may require security clearance, let's say from Home Ministry. So, I mean, when you speak with your clients, I mean, is there like some concern that while they may welcome FIPB removal on one hand, but there could be other lingering issues where they may actually have to, go from pillar to post to get those specific clearances to, so that they are allowed to invest in India?
So I don't know whether they will have to go from pillar to post. We are all awaiting what the government puts in place in terms of replacing the FIPB. So instead of FIPB operating as the nodal body, they probably will designate someone in DIPP or someone in MOF to act as that nodal body where a foreign investor falling under the approval route could sort of take his application for approval too. That said, I completely agree with you. Actually, I do not view FIPB as the last relic of industrial licensing, as you said. I think FIPB over the years has been a body that has actually stood its ground in terms of standing true to its basic objective of encouraging foreign investment in the country. I've seen personally many instances where even despite objections from administrative ministries, FIPB has had the courage to overrule objections in some situations, and it has been able to do that because it has had a bunch of, it has had a committee or collection of government officials who've been empowered to carry out and execute on a particular approval. Now, it will be therefore interesting to see what happens when FIPB is no longer there. At one level, I feel, having worked with so many foreign investors, I feel that possibly we would have lost an ally. But at the same time, I'm cognizant of the fact that this government wants to encourage investment, and therefore whatever it will replace the FIPB with will be as robust a structure and therefore will encourage foreign investment.
Okay, Vivek, you spoke about how foreign investors have been listing their set of demands. We spoke about three specific sectors in our story. If you had to list out the sectors that are awaiting foreign investment, which foreign investors are waiting to put their money in, which would they be, and which would be the top picks from your client's perspective?
See, a large portion of the Indian economy is already open for automatic foreign investment. So 90% or 95%
in terms of the
investment
hiccups that are there, which are the sectors that still need opening up from a foreign investor perspective?
So I think retail is one sector where we have not really opened up meaningfully, particularly for multi-brand retail. I think single-brand retail, still there are enough models where we have a fairly reasonable policy framework. The approval route also, and I know that a lot of majority single-brand proposals go through the approval route, but even that approval route has been reasonably smooth. So single-brand retail, I don't have too much trouble. I think multi-brand retail is where India has not seen any foreign investment happen. So of the restricted sectors, I would say multi-brand retail is a sector where one would want to see more activity. Defense is very, very sensitive from a national security standpoint. I think the government has tried to do its bit there. I still think that perhaps a little more will tip foreign investors over. But of course, defense has to be sort of balanced from a national security angle. But I think multi-brand retail is something that the government could meaningfully look to open, particularly as our experience with foreign investment in e-commerce, which actually happened just because there was no very clear government policy on it, has not been as bad as one originally thought it might be.
Right, Vivek. Let me quickly squeeze in another question because my producers now are telling me to, to wrap up this conversation. Let's talk about retail. And of course, in June, the government also announced opening up of the food retail sector. And thereafter, we've seen the Walmarts and the Tesco's of the world saying this only food-only model is not there anywhere in the world because the margin on food is so low. So allow us to bring in some amount of non-food items, personal care items. It can be cream, shampoo, soap, whatever. Now it seems that after months of back and forth between DIPP, PMO and the Food Processing Ministry, there seems to be some consensus and we may expect some caveat as far as food retail is concerned post-Holi. If that happens, do you think that will be enough to bring in FDI in the food retail sectors? So far, we haven't seen any proposals there, Vivek.
Yes, exactly. So that's the point that I was making. To make this business economically viable, you have to let it operate like a normal supermarket store that you see around the world. For it to operate like a normal supermarket store, you can't have constraints like you cannot sell toothpaste, but you can sell chewing gum. So the point is, it will have to be a mix of products which makes it an economically viable model. I would most certainly expect that if non-food items are indeed allowed, then at least one format of multi-brand retail, which is food-based supermarkets. Let's call them food-based supermarkets because 70% will still be food. So food-based supermarkets may take off in some form or fashion. But it's still a far cry from getting the Walmart type of large format stores into the country, and the government is very well within its rights to say now is not the time to get those stores in. But if it does make the amendment for getting non-food items, I would expect that the food-based supermarket stores should then become economically feasible.
All right, Vivek, completely out of time on India Business Hour, but we'll have to leave that conversation. Thanks for joining in. And that is a space that we will closely watch out for. March is the timeline that Ritu had pointed out. There could be some clarity on the reforms in those three sectors. But moving on.